There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. That memorable quote attributed to Lenin is perhaps appropriate for the times we live in now. Donald Trump has completed a month in office in his second term. But Trump 2.0's first few weeks have seen unprecedented action and disruption. A slew of executive orders by the American president, official statements and off-the-cuff remarks have kept the United States and much of the world, including here in India, on the edge. What will Trump 2.0 do next is the biggest X factor that's almost now become a daily debate. How should the world see Donald Trump's second coming? And what does it mean for the world order? These are some of the questions we will be exploring on a very special global roundtable here on India Today. I'm joined by special guests from across the world, in a true sense, a global roundtable. Jeremy Issacharoff is former Vice DG in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Israel. Appreciate your joining us. Richard Russo is Senior Advisor, Center for Strategic and International Studies. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Professor Sari Hanafi is Director, American University, Beirut. Tinatin Aklevidyani is Research Fellow she's at the EU Foreign Policy Unit. She joins us there. Zachary Paikin, Deputy Director, will also be joining us later in the show. And Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, former Secretary MEA, is with us. And Andrew K.P. Leung, China strategist, is joining us from Hong Kong. And as I said, we're traveling across the globe today on the Global Roundtable. The big question, is Donald Trump simply the biggest disruptor to hit the world in the last 75 years, since World War II, some would say? I want to go to all our panelists, starting with you, Mr. Russo, there in America. Is he, in your view, simply the biggest disruptor, given what we've seen in the last few weeks?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I've been in Washington for almost 30 years and never seen anything quite like this out of the gates. We look at some of the major changes that we've seen in our relationships, and some of that echoes things that we saw the last time that he was in office, the challenges to our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, concerns about immigration, but the quick snap that you've seen on Russia. But, you know, the bigger thing, I think, is the changes that we've seen here in Washington on gutting federal agencies, a lot of the career diplomats and bureaucrats that we've seen that actually lead day-to-day a lot of our engagement with the world are gone. Not just the career folks, not just the political appointees, but a lot of career folks. So I think the things that you see in the flash and the news and the changes, the direction, the foreign policy is one thing, but we're losing the machinery here right now. And we don't know yet what the plan is to rebuild that and bring it back again. USAID, of course, but a lot of career folks at State Department. So a huge disruption, not seen anything like it, certainly not even in Trump's first term.
Just to press you on that, are you therefore suggesting that what we're seeing is essentially a one-man show? We, of course, hear the Elon Musks of the world on Twitter making their own comments about the world. But is this essentially now the complete personalization of foreign policy in the hands of Donald Trump?
Well, I think they sat 4 years out of office and were planning for this day. They knew the entire time they had a reasonably good chance of coming back to office. So a lot of planning had been happening during that period. So they didn't come in carte blanche, and a lot of people have access to President Trump during that period. But, you know, at the end of the day, you look back at the last administration and you think of the most important positions, your chief of staff, your national security advisor, the secretary of defense. They went through people at an amazing rate last time around. So those that we think have influence, maybe that's true for a few minutes. But last time he was in office, you saw a tremendous level of churn of a lot of cabinet and senior people inside the White House. So I do believe folks like Elon Musk, you see him every day, a lot of access, a lot of visibility, a lot of influence. But we'll see whether or not they remain, because last time it was a very short tenure for people that had that kind of access and influence with the president.
Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, your former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, from an Indian perspective, have you seen anything quite like what we're seeing in the last few weeks? Every day throws up a new headline with Donald Trump throwing up numbers about reciprocal tariffs, then suggesting that there were amounts paid across the world to destabilize governments by US aids. Have we seen anything like this? Have you seen in your long experience anyone quite like Donald Trump?
Well, not really. And I think He's quite unique in his own way. But let's not forget that his domestic disruption is far more overwhelming than what he's trying to do internationally. And I think our friend from the US just also referred to that. Now, US aid, let me say that US aid has been functioning in India for a very long time. And we do know what they fund and who they fund. And that is not, these are open funding arrangements. But behind the scenes, there are also, I would say, the political agenda of the government that funds it. That's very natural, because if the man who pays the piper calls the tune. So that has always been the case in international politics. But I think what we are seeing today is certainly a throwback to the appeasement of the far right conservative sections of the U.S. But let me end by saying that while Trump may try to do all these things, let us not forget there will be pushback. I know of many diplomats in the Trump 1.0 who resigned. They were my friends. They said, so when I asked them, why are you quitting? They said, look, we can't just work with this guy anymore. So I think there is a lot of domestic pushback going to happen. There are many things that Trump is overstretching and crossing the Rubicon in terms of, let's say, trade deals, etc., because he's trying to bypass the Congress. But I don't know how much the Congress will fight back. But certainly he's trying to appease the section which has brought him into power. But there is a very large section which are very, very apprehensive and angry about what he's doing. So even in the domestics, there will be, and then of course the courts are.
So you're saying there will be some. I'm going to stop you for a moment. You're saying you could see some kind of pushback, but let's focus on the moment now, because what we are seeing, Dr. Tinatin Akhilavadyani, research fellow at the Center for European Policy Studies, is Trump seems to want to completely remap the world order. The old world order post-World War II, based essentially on rules, multilateral commitments, being replaced by military and economic might, almost sort of even Europe, long-standing ally, being pushed to the margins, Trump directly dealing with Russia when it comes to Ukraine. Are we seeing a complete disruption, particularly where you are in Europe at the moment?
Indeed, this is, I think, a very good and correct description of what's going on now. I mean, obviously, Europe and European Union and its like-minded countries feel very much abandoned by Trump's change of mind. These are the talks that he's having in Saudi Arabia with Putin, not in Europe, because the war is currently raging in the European continent, not in Kiev, because this is the capital of the country, which was actually invaded. And as you rightly pointed out, this is the violation of the international law and the rules-based order. So there is quite high stakes, quite high, and the EU is currently, quite shocked with that, and we see all this contemplation on how to fill the gaps if the Trump continues to throw Ukraine under the bus, and in fact, very much echo what Kremlin wants to see and wants to hear about that.
Is it much the same mood at the moment in the Middle East? Jeremy Ishasharov, your former Vice Director General at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, former Head Multilateral Affairs Directorate, Israel. How does Israel see it? Benjamin Netanyahu was among the first world leaders to meet Donald Trump and hailed him for his initiatives in the Middle East. Is there a very different perspective there in the Middle East to what it is in Europe at the moment? Is Donald Trump someone whom Israel believes is the right man at the right place?
Well, first of all, I would defer to my American and my European colleagues on what they've said about the impact of the Trump presidency on internal American affairs and on Europe. Regarding the Middle East, I think the situation is a little more complicated. As you know, we are in the middle of implementing the hostage deal, the first stage of the hostage deal, which has been a very traumatic experience for Israel, particularly yesterday after the the receipt of four bodies, 3 of which only were classified as being Israelis. And it's been a very difficult time. But one of the things that Trump has said that he wants, and he's put pressure on implementing the hostage deal, which also means ending the war. And there's a great deal of support within Israel for that approach. The other idea he's come up with is turning Gaza into a Riviera, which, frankly, personally, I'm sure Mr. Netanyahu found a positivity in that idea. I find less, and I think it's very difficult to see how it could actually be implemented on the ground and if it's at all desirable. But one thing I would say is that his ideas have actually spurned the Arab countries to start thinking about alternative solutions. There have been discussions in Saudi Arabia, I think today. There will be discussions in Egypt coming up with ideas, ultimately, which would emphasize the idea of implementing the two-state solution. So I think that if Mr. Trump wants to help the parties come to some sort of agreement, we should revisit the idea of a two-state solution. Now, the last thing I want to say, I think the cutting the USAID will have an impact on the Middle East, on the Palestinian territories, and also cutting aid to the Palestinian security forces also is a negative idea. So these are the things. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but It's still early to judge.
It's a bit of a mixed bag there as far as the Middle East is concerned. Very different views coming in for Europe. Before I come to you, Professor Hanafi, let me just play what Donald Trump said on Gaza. It's one of those off-the-cuff remarks that he tends to make that immediately attract attention and controversy. That's the kind of person he is. Listen in to what he said, and then I'll get you to respond.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site, and get rid of the destroyed buildings. And I don't want to be cute, I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad, this could be so magnificent.
Peace between Israel.
Professor Sari Hanafi there in Beirut. Here is Donald Trump talking about a French Riviera like Gaza. I mean, these are the kind of remarks that he's making, which is obviously sending various kinds of shockwaves in some parts of the world.
Yeah, actually, we will able to talk to each other from India, from Israel, from US, because we have a common language. This common language come from international relation, from humanitarian and international laws. And Mr. Trump is absolutely violate all level of this universalistic language. What is going on Gaza is a genocide according to major international human rights organizations. So he is not talking about genocide. He is talking just to take the hostage. Actually, on Israel, it has 100,000 of Palestinian hostage. It's a colonial state in West Bank and Gaza. All this is,
so are you saying the Arab world cannot trust Donald Trump? Are you telling me the Arab world will simply not trust Arab world?
I am worried on the level of racism, of Islamophobia, of denying basic vocabulary of international law. According to the international law, Israel is an occupied forces in Palestinian territories. So he is not talking neither to one-state solution nor to two-state solutions. He think about as a businessman who, as a real estate developer, is really in the Arab world. We see Trump is absolutely not only violating a basic right for the Palestinians, but also really is violating all levels.
So you believe Trump is going against? I take your point that you believe Donald Trump is going against. You believe the basic principles of humanity and the universal principles of human rights. Mr. Russo, respond there in America. America was seen as the champion of human rights, the champion of democratic rights. Along comes Donald Trump and indeed his Vice President Vance, who in Europe had comments to make about what he believed was the selectivity and hypocrisy of democratic nations when it came to free speech. Is Trump spoiling for a fight? Or, as my next question suggests, is Donald Trump the kind of person who will end wars, whether it's the war in Gaza or the war in Ukraine? Will Donald Trump be a kind of leader who will end wars, is my next question that I want to put to you, Mr. Russo, or is he someone who has a certain contempt for the old global world order?
Well, I think what's been missing so far in the discussion, and of course it's still very early on your show today, we've talked about Europe, we've talked about the Middle East, but going back to President Obama, President Trump's first term, President Biden, it's been the stated policy, very overt, of the United States across multiple administrations that we begin shifting our attention to what is the rising strategic threat for the world, which is China, which is the Indo-Pacific. And so I suppose that this second round of Trump, you've seen an acceleration of things that he hinted at, demanding that Europeans step up their own security arrangements and spending. This time, no time to waste. He's got 1 4-year term left. And for these big changes that he hinted at last time around, really trying to accelerate those initial days in office. So, we've talked a lot about destabilization and of course, pressing for peace in both Europe as well as the Middle East. In my neck of the woods, focusing more on the Indo-Pacific, you've seen a little bit more stability, outreach to traditional partners. Japan, of course, a great visit by Indian Prime Minister last week. So I think at the end of the day, they haven't articulated it quite so strongly. But what you're going to see in a drawdown from Europe is really a continuation and acceleration of what he hinted at last time. And I suspect you're going to see an acceleration of a lot of partnerships in the Indo-Pacific across the next 3.5 years of the administration. So that certainly follows on peace, security, human rights, just aiming for, I think, a different foe, a different challenge that we see.
Let me take that to Andrew Lewing there in China. How are you seeing what's happening at the moment from a Chinese perspective? There is some commentary which suggests Donald Trump dealing with Russia directly has left the Chinese feeling red-faced. Or do the Chinese believe that they can do a deal with Trump? Is Trump the ultimate deal maker? As I said, my next question was, is Trump the right person to end the war in Ukraine, for example? And where would that leave China if Trump goes ahead and does a direct deal with the Russians on Ukraine?
I think that China has been watching the Trump administration very, very carefully since Trump 1.0. Of course, the tariffs part is nothing new. I mean, it's doubling down on it, and it's imposing tariffs not only on China, but on friends alike. So that's something new. Now, but what is startling, of course, even to Chinese observers, is that he's torn away the fig leaf from this rhetoric of so-called American-led liberal order. According to many scholars, the so-called liberal world order is neither liberal or world or based on American dominance in the first place. But now even the fig leaf is now removed. So he's introducing the rules of the jungle, trampling on the sovereignty of even close allies like Canada and Mexico and Panama. And it's also sanctioning or putting tariffs on friends alike. And then he's even belittling European nations.
But does China fear a Trump administration now, given what's happened over the last few weeks? Or does China has China been unsettled by what's happened?
Well, China is well prepared, much more prepared for Trump compared with Trump 1.0, because since Trump 1.0, during the Biden administration, under the directive of President Xi, the country is now has been embarking on self-reliance on technology, and it's been very successful. Look at what's happening on even on AI in the form of a game-changing, a deep seek kind of platform. Look at China's independently developing its own space stations and bringing soil samples from the backside of the moon. So I think that China is now doubling down on not only on self-reliance on technology, but on expanding its trade with the global South.
That's very interesting. I'm just stopping you for a moment. You're making a very interesting observation. Actually, the rise of Trump is also leading China to push for greater self-reliance, to look for technology. We've seen what they've done with DeepSeek. We've seen the manner in which China, in a way, is also strengthening itself. But the big question, of course, the immediate question is the Ukraine war. Given what's happened in the last few days, the meeting between the United States and Russia and Saudi Arabia, can Donald Trump end the Ukraine war is a big question being posed. Just listen in for a moment what Donald Trump had to say about the Ukrainian President Zelensky that again has that has really stirred the pot across the world.
Every city is being demolished. They look like a demolition site, every single one of them. And the only thing he was really good at was playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. He played him like a fiddle. That's an expression we use, yes, sir, to say that he's pretty easy. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast because that war is going in the wrong direction. In the meantime, we're successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something I'll admit that only Trump is going to be able to do in the Trump administration. We're going to be able to do it.
Dr. Tinatin, there in Brussels, how do you see what you just heard from Donald Trump? He calls Zelensky the dictator, and he's ready to do business with Putin. Are we again seeing a recrafting in a way of relationships?
We see recrafting of the relationships, but we also see the recrafting of the reality, because what he says is just not true by evidence. Zelensky has been democratically elected president by the constitution of Ukraine. It allows the country to stay under the current government until the situation is peaceful again, which is definitely not the case. Also, he claims, that Ukraine is to be blamed for the war. We all agree who started the war, that was Russia, and this is the violation of the international law. Now, as he insists of ending the war, I think the question we should be asking is, can Trump really have the agreement that can lead to the peace and that can lead to the lasting peace? Also, every war ends with some winners and with some losers. The question to be asked here, who will win this war? So far, of course, it's very early to have some forecasts, but so far, the way these processes have been started, it's not promising because Trump is having talks with Putin. Now, peaceful agreement or the ending the war involves at least the two parties engaged in the war. Ukraine has not been at the table. So far, what he is saying, basically, he is echoing the voice of Kremlin. So my is here that he's really, under the influence and under the fake news built by Kremlin. Right. He is basically treating the diplomacy like a transaction, but he is a business, deal maker. He should not forget whose card is he playing. Are we just witnessing that he is playing the cards of Kremlin? Are we also witnessing that now Kremlin is basically winning the war? Will President Trump be happy if the history marks as the win of Kremlin, not Trump, not his own way of thinking? And obviously, the stakes are quite high now.
Mr. Russo, you just heard my guest from Europe suggesting that Donald Trump is echoing the voice of Kremlin. He's a transactional figure who's treating diplomacy also as a business deal. These are comments we haven't heard about a U.S. president in a long time. How do you respond to that?
I agree with the comment. I mean, it is exactly the kind of media that you see Russia putting out about their version of the cast of events. I think to say that President Biden was tricked into this, I mean, there's studies that show that the United States, basically spent just a few percentage of our defense budget to totally dismantle about half of Russia's military capabilities in Ukraine. But it also presumes that Ukrainians do not want to fight for their own independence. So those are the game fought between world leaders, and the people of Ukraine don't want to fight, for themselves for their own independence. So it is a strange thing to see. Of course, senior U.S. military commanders think the opportunity for Ukraine to achieve more military gains is pretty limited at this point, mostly a defensive measure there. So, coming to a deal that is agreeable makes a lot of sense at this point because there may be no future gains for Ukraine to potentially be made. But for Ukraine not to be at the table, once again, is fighting going to continue? Are they going to accept a deal that's signed by others? That's pretty unclear, and frankly, it's pretty difficult to believe. So what's happening with these dialogues may not actually result in much on the field.
Mr. Chakrabarti, this is part of the problem India is facing at the moment. There is a sense of uncertainty as to what happens in Ukraine, what happens in West Asia. Is this an uncertainty that countries like India will have to live with? We were talking, Prime Minister Modi was talking about sort of helping out in the war in Ukraine, reaching out to Putin, reaching out to Zelensky. Trump needs no Modi, he needs no other leaders. He's dealing now directly with the principals himself.
That is what is has always said that we don't need this war and it has to stop. So in that sense, Trump also thinks along those lines that he has to stop this war. Now, of course, Zelensky is now between a rock and a hard place because you see the earlier assumption of the Biden administration that they would use Ukraine to defeat Russia has fallen by the wayside. That assessment itself, for whatever geostrategic reason, was a faulty one. And I think Trump knows that. And I think Trump has also realized that the Europeans who were also, tricked into this war in a sense, that because demonize Russia, demonize Putin, and then get Ukraine to keep on fighting.
But the truth of the matter is that this war was, whether we like it or not, initiated by the Russians.
I mean, I agree, yes. It was done by the Russians. But don't forget, there is a background to it. After all, several agreements were signed that Ukraine will not be admitted into NATO. You have to look at the background, not just what Russia did, which it did certainly and violated territorial integrity. But you must look at the background as to why it happened. So that is very important. And I'm not going into that. The whole world knows why it happened. And I think Trump basically also wants to reverse Biden's policies to show that, that we are not committed to that kind of approach. And hence, he is going ahead with this talks. And I think what ultimately, as our friend from Brussels was saying, that there will be compromises have to be made. And I think in this case, Ukraine will have to make most of the compromises in terms of territory because it has no other choice.
Let me take that to Zachary. Let me take that. You're saying Ukraine has very few choices on the table. Zachary Paikin is joining us, Deputy Director, Better Order Project, to give us another European perspective. Is that where we've reached, where Trump has pushed Zelensky now into a corner, and thereby we could well see America and Russia figure out some kind of an agreement between themselves? Or do you believe no agreement can be without the Ukrainians on the table?
No, but by definition, the Ukrainians are going to have to agree to any final settlement. Otherwise, it will not take effect. That's simply a fact. It's not a question of one's perspective. If the Ukrainians want to keep on fighting, the Americans might be able to restrict what they're able to obtain, but there isn't going to be a total and complete settlement of this conflict in the political sense unless the Ukrainians agree. Now, that doesn't mean that the Ukrainians need to be involved in every single aspect of these negotiations from the get-go. Otherwise, things might not necessarily get anywhere. I think the Trump administration is perfectly right to signal that it is serious about these talks by reaching out, to the Russians, by initiating, new contacts, renewing diplomatic relations between the two sides. But this is a nested conflict. There are some issues, that are going to have to be resolved between the Ukrainians and the Russians. But there are other issues involving the broader European security order that are going to have to be worked out between the Americans and the Europeans and the Russians. And so there are going to be multiple negotiating tracks going on. And it's perfectly acceptable for some of those tracks to involve the United States and the Russians. There needs to be the political space available for those two great powers to be able to speak to each other.
Let's for a moment then pivot to West Asia, which is the other big conflict that's taken place in the last 24 months. Can Donald Trump ensure a lasting peace in West Asia? Ambassador Isha Sharaf, do you believe that that's possible? Is that actually possible? The one problem that has, in a way, beleaguered administrations through the years, is Donald Trump the man to ensure a lasting peace in West Asia, or is it again transactional for him there as well?
Well, I think it actually could be transactional, and it could also be historic. First of all, after a year, virtually a year and a half of this war, we should recognize that the whole of the strategic situation in the Middle East has changed. Hamas has been weakened, Hezbollah has been weakened, the regime has changed in Syria, and I think also Iran has been is going to remain on the agenda for a long time in terms of its nuclear ambition. So I think there's an opportunity here for the moderate states, for the moderate Arab states in Israel to look towards a genuine settlement. And I would hope that the Trump administration would concentrate first and foremost on ending this war, getting all of the hostages back to Israel and completing the whole of the hostage exchange. I think it's important to agree to an agreed and credible pathway to a two-state solution that could open up our relationship with Saudi Arabia and even possibly with Syria. And also, I would think that it's going to stay on the agenda. Iran is going to have to be dealt with. So you need to deal with the opportunity for peace, but you still have to deal with the dangers to the stability and security of the moderate Middle East. And that is an agenda that I would hope that President Trump would adopt. Will he? I think the juries are still out on that.
Professor Hanafi, do you see Donald Trump being able to, in a way, separate the moderate Middle East states from those who are seen to adhere to the Iranian version of exporting their kind of politics? And do you therefore believe that there will be some states now under Trump's pressure that may even abandon the Palestinian cause? You're on mute, sir.
First, I think we are dealing with a businessman, and businessman, he can be sold by some money. I don't know coming from where, from the Gulf or any other place. So it's unpredictable, Trump, where he will be headed. However, so far, the sign is very bleak. He is abandoning totally what is international rhetoric.
No, but will the Arab states at any stage abandon the Palestinian cause if it comes to that?
Well, before 7 October, it was an idea that we can go into normalization like Morocco and United Arab Emirates without a genuine commitment of Israel to two-state solution. Now, I think after 7 October, the Arab world realized that this is not possible without realizing a just solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or the Arab-Israeli conflict, actually, because Syria is also, the Golan Heights are occupied. So I think for the first time, I see no one in the Arab world would accept the ethnic cleansing plan of Trump, Netanyahu, and also I doubt that they will normalize without a serious two-state or one-state solution.
So you're saying a serious two-state solution.
And let me say one word.
Yes.
What is really transforming from my colleague from Israel, he is talking about weakening Hamas, etc. But the big issue at stake today, how to weaken this religious Zionism of Ghafir, this radical far who colonize Palestinian territories. West Bank is not only under heavy attack in West Bank today after the genocide of Gaza, but is a continuous stealing land. So this is the major issue at stake.
I take your point. You're saying that these disputes cannot be settled.
And not only who could weaken Hamas. This is if we will have our humanity when we're talking about a colonial project. Like
okay, I'm going to stop you, Professor Hanafi, for a moment, because I want to go back to another critical issue. will Donald Trump unleash a global tariff war? This is the concern in several parts of the world, including here in India, possibly there in China. Mr. Liu, is that the fear the Chinese have? You mentioned earlier in the program about China pushing for greater self-reliance, more technology. But listen into what Donald Trump said on reciprocal tariffs, and then and as well on BRICS. But listen in first to reciprocal tariffs.
Well, India's been, to us, just about the highest tariffed nation anywhere in the world. They've been very strong on tariffs, and I don't blame them necessarily, but it's a different way of doing business. It's very hard to sell into India because they have trade barriers, very strong tariffs. We are right now a reciprocal nation. We are going to, if it's India or if it's somebody else with low tariffs, we're going to have the same. We're going to have whatever India charges, we're charging them. Whatever another country charges, we're charging them. So it's called reciprocal, which I think is a very fair. So we are being reciprocal with India. Whatever India charges, we charge them. So frankly, it no longer matters to us that much what they charge.
Okay, let me first go to Mr. Chakravarti and then come to Mr. Liu, since India was specifically mentioned by Donald Trump on reciprocal tariffs. I'll come to you, Mr. Liu, in a moment. Mr. Chakravarti, a quick comment on that. Should India be worried? It appears that the Prime Minister was able to negotiate a deferral of some of these tariffs, but it's still very much there on the table.
Well, I think the crucial part of this is whether the reciprocal tariff that he's talking about will follow the what we call the MFN policy of the WTO. That is, if I raise the tariff on any product to whatever level, will it be applicable to all the countries? Because that is the MFN rule under WTO. Or is he saying that I won't accept the MFN clause at all and I'm walking out of the WTO as well?
But Trump is very capable of walking out. Trump is very capable, Mr. Chakravarti, if necessary, of setting his own rules even to WTO.
Well, I think then he'll have to do a reciprocal tariff on a country basis. That's what he wants. Because you raise the tariff, then it is applicable to all countries. That's a different thing. And I think this is where we do not know what exactly is going to happen. Because if it is reciprocal, then India will get hit by some of it. But I also feel that, the kind of exports we have and the kind of exports America has to India, so there's a good deal of what is between us, is services trade, which is, there's no tariff on that. But, so I think we'll have to see whether it is.
Yeah, but he's already, as we've seen, he's already put tariffs on steel and aluminium. We've got Indian steel and aluminium exporters complaining.
That is for all countries. That is for all countries.
Sure, it is all countries. But as I said, when Trump strikes, he seems to strike across the world. Let me bring in Mr. Liu. Mr. Liu, from a Chinese perspective, is Trump going to unleash a global tariff war, and where will China stand on that?
If you look at the tariffs on China, even though Trump initially touted 60% tariffs or even higher on China, but has now chosen to impose 10% for a start, compared with 25% on Canada and Mexico, Americans' closest neighbor and allies. So, and also, if you look at China's response, it's been carefully calibrated, not the kind of exactly tit for tat, but very well chosen to register the point that China doesn't believe in tariffs. But on the other hand, China's got used to these tariffs since Trump 1.0 and the Biden administration as well. As I said, China's now selling much more to the global South. And you will look at the global supply and value chain. Even though products marked made in India, made in Vietnam, made in Malaysia, they have China embedded in it in terms of components, in terms of raw materials, in terms of rare earths, and in terms of logistics. For example, the world's largest 7 container ports out of the top 11 are in China. So I think that China's now got used to tariffs in a way. But also, unlike the Biden administration, Trump wants more investments into the United States. And that's something Beijing may well agree to, because if you look at around the world, a lot of the manufacturing, for example, cars, are already, for example, China is now only a company in the United Kingdom producing their black taxis. The same thing could happen in the United States, and that would stabilize the relationship between the two.
That's interesting. That's interesting the way you're putting it. You know, Richard Russo, therefore, give us the big picture. When you hear these voices from China, when you hear these voices from India, there are both challenges and opportunities that are being seen in what Donald Trump is unleashing, especially when it comes to tariffs. How much of this is, you believe, bluster? How much of this is to just simply eventually strike good deals that he believes will benefit America? How should we see someone who every morning gets up with some new idea?
Yeah, I think there's three broad drivers behind tariffs, and everything we've talked about so far falls into the buckets, and you kind of hinted at what they are. You know, on one level, strategic issues where, you know, we feel that China has a lot of explicit and implicit subsidies to its manufacturers. American companies are not competitive, but also in areas of dual-use technology and such, where we're concerned about China's militaristic approach to its neighbors. We don't want China to have a stranglehold on the creation of significant technology. So, you know, you're going to see the United States using tariff and other industrial policy to try to, you know, for strategic reasons for countries like China to be competitive. The second is, as you hinted at, is a negotiating tactic, and that's where I see primarily with Mexico and Canada, with Mexico pushing tariffs as a way to bring Mexico to the table on border security, similar issues with Canada. But the third, and that's the biggest bucket, which is America's competitiveness with the rest of the world, and we're waiting for April. You had flashing up on screen, I think, some really terrific graphics that highlight, you know, the United States does pay higher tariffs to move our goods into other countries versus what those countries get here. So April is when that report's supposed to come out, and I suspect that while we had a relatively successful U.S.-India summit last week, we expect as well that India is going to get pretty hard when the April report comes out. You know, the question is, President Trump has said that bilateral trade agreements are on the table, including with India. Can we maybe work around some of those pain points by stuffing a lot of our trade goods baskets into what we're going to consider for a trade agreement? Hopefully get that first tranche done by the end of the year, as leaders have promised. But three big circles right now, different drivers for each. But I think the strategic and the overall competitiveness, those two buckets, I think there's going to be real concrete actions that aren't going to be rolled back by the end of the year.
That's very interesting, because it leads me to my final question, with whether Donald Trump at the end of the day is good or bad for India and global South, or dare I say the world in general. Is this someone who is at the right place at the right time, or is he someone who is simply bad news for the world? I want you to take that, Mr. Chakravarti, but ahead of that, let me just put out what Donald Trump said on BRICS after threatening to slap the bloc with tariffs. How did he respond? Listen in.
How about BRICS? You know, the BRIC states, there are like 6 of them, and they were trying to destroy our dollar. They were going to say, you know, they wanted to create a new currency. They probably wanted to use the yuan. China, they wanted to use the yuan. And Biden said, well, this is a tough situation. There's not much we can do about that. We can't help that. I said, oh, we can help it. So when I came in, the first thing I said is any BRIC state that even mentions the destruction of the dollar will be charged a 150% tariff. And we don't want your goods. We don't want to partake. And the BRIC states just broke up. I don't know what the hell happened to them. We haven't heard from the BRIC states lately.
Ambassador Chakravarti, when you hear statements like that, virtually suggesting that, you know, here is a U.S. president, no time for BRICS, no time for these regional arrangements that have been made, wants to deal directly with countries, possibly strike bilateral trade agreements. Should India be concerned or not?
Well, India has to be concerned, because what he will do, what he will not do, we are not sure. But I think his main focus was on de-dollarization. That is, American, global hegemony is one of the pillars is the dollar. I mean, the dollar economy, the financial system. And that is why they have weaponized that system against Russia and various other countries. And many countries now have been thinking whether to trade in their own currency or in some other currency, which has happened. you will remember that during the heydays of non-alignment, India and the Soviet Union had a rupee-ruble arrangement. We didn't go through the dollar. So this is nothing new in terms of trading in your own currency. But he clearly feels that America's financial hegemony depends on the dollar. And that is why he's threatening BRICS. Because BRICS.
So is he good for India? Is a Donald Trump, in your sense, good for India at the moment or not?
Well, we have to balance it out. I don't think it is. We are in a gray area today. I don't think he's entirely good or entirely bad.
Okay, so let me go right round the table one last time to ask each of you, is the world in a better place 1 month after Donald Trump took over? Zachary Paikin, you first, Deputy Director, Better Order Project there in Geneva. Is the world in a better place, Zachary, than it was a month ago?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is it's too early to tell, but there are some optimistic signals and some pessimistic signals. On the optimistic side, it seems as if President Trump wants to talk to other great powers and to abandon a mentality of primacy in which the United States effectively appoints itself as the sole arbiter of global rules, as the dominant actor in every single region of the globe, in which it is the only rule maker and everyone else is expected to be, especially non-allies, are expected to be a rule taker. That's a mentality to some extent that Donald Trump has distanced himself with. He's positioned himself as a deal maker. He said he's open to talking with Russia. He's even open to talking with China. And there are initial reports. Obviously, there's a debate going on within the U.S. administration on this, but there are reports that Donald Trump might be willing to strike a mutually beneficial economic agreement with China that could see more, Chinese purchases of American goods, more Chinese investment in the United States, which is not something that the hawks would necessarily want. And Donald Trump has even talked about the possibility of a trilateral denuclearization plan, strategic stability and reduction of nuclear arms. So reinvigorating arms control is something that very much would be very beneficial for the international order. What concerns me is obviously this rhetoric, concerning America's desire to dominate its so-called near abroad, as it were, if I could put it that way, which harkens back to previous eras in U.S. foreign policy, this more continentalist or Monroe Doctrine-centric foreign policy. If this does lead to certain efforts to take territory by force, whether it's economic force or military force, whether it's Canada, my home country, Greenland, the Panama Canal, what have you, then obviously that would be much, much more problematic, as that would run against fundamental norms such as sovereignty that lie at the heart of today's international order. But just because Donald Trump is not doing business as usual within the transatlantic community does not mean that he's overturning the international order writ large, right? Just because he wants to talk to Russia doesn't mean that the international order is in crisis, because the international order is more than just the Western transatlantic community. It's more than just the liberal international order.
Because the fact is, Jeremy Ishisharov, there in Israel, that there are commentators speaking about Donald Trump's vision of spheres of influence. You create spheres of influence, a Russian sphere of influence, possibly a Chinese sphere of influence, and certainly an American sphere of influence. Is that something that should worry the world? Is the world in a better place today than it was a month ago? I know a month is not a very long time in politics, but Trump makes it appear so.
Well, I think the Middle East, for one thing, could be in a better place if the American administration puts its influence and power behind an agreed and credible political horizon between Israel and the Palestinians. As I said before, this is a strategic opportunity. It's important for Israel and the Palestinians, moderate Palestinians, not the ones that Mr. Hanafi has talked about as being such, liberal freedom fighters, but genocidal terrorists like Hamas. But I'm talking about moderate Palestinians. This is a key to regional stability and greater normalization between Israel and its Arab neighbors. And it also will be a key to dealing with Iran and its negative influence to regional security in the area. And one thing I'd like to throw out there is that I think, and I've been thinking a lot about this, is that India also has a role to play. You have an idea of having an India, Middle East, European corridor that would come through the Middle East. And this could be a major factor in giving an economic infrastructure to the two-state solution. So I would think very carefully of furthering and promoting this idea along with the two-state solution. It could be of great benefit to Jordan, to the Palestinians, to Israel, to the Saudis, and to the UAE and other Gulf countries.
How should then India deal, Mr. Chakravarti, with Donald Trump? Given what you've heard, what is India's role in your view? Very quickly.
Well, I think we'll be looking at different domains and trying to balance I mean, you have several sectors in which India and the US do business. There's the defense sector, and of course, there is the strategic factor of the Quad. I mean, if the Americans and under Trump are serious about the Quad, then they'll have to be serious about India as well. Because without India, the Quad cannot go any further. And I think those are some of the balancing factors that India will be looking at.
But if a Trump administration, Mr. Chakravarti, strikes a deal tomorrow with China, should India be worried? There's talk of a potential economic partnership. Trump will see might is right. He'll go with the Chinese. Where does that leave us?
Well, I think that is also possible, but that will be more economic. I don't think the Americans are going to abandon the fact that China will be a competitor and a threat in future to their own global hegemony. And they will want to balance that as well.
Okay. Andrew Lewin, do you see this possibility of China and the United States coming closer together very quickly?
If you look at what Trump wants right from the very start, his ambitions over Canada, Greenland, Mexico, Panama, they are all in the Western Hemisphere. This is a Monroe Doctrine writ large. Suggest, and also he wants to ease the stop the war in Ukraine, probably to Russians' favor, and he's probably want to strike a deal with Iran and with another new deal to have peace in the Middle East. So I think that he wants to go down in history as a peace president, and yet trying to make America great again by focusing on the sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere. And
so we are talking about a 21st
with China.
Right. We're talking about a 21st century Monroe Doctrine, but I want to give Richard Russo the final word. We started off with you there in Washington. He's, after all, your president at the end of the day. Do you believe 1 month on, is the world a safer place, Mr. Russo, than it was when Donald Trump took over? Or do you believe we can only judge that 4 years from now?
I think it's mostly been negative so far. We're in the shredding phase. You know, they're trying to throw every single thing that we've got in the shredder, key relationships with Europe, with Canada, with others, dismantling USAID, withdrawing from organizations, you know, the climate accords, WHO, the tariff war against the world. So right now, in kind of this deconstruction phase, we're causing more chaos than I think that, we're versus being helpful. The question is, is there going to be a construction phase where they take a look at all these institutions we've abandoned, where we double down on the Quad, we look for, what's the status of AUKUS going to be, those vital relationships that we need to build, or institutions that we need to reinvigorate or create. So absolute destruction phase right now across the board, causing a lot of instability, a lot of questions. But will there be a construction phase? Because that has not been articulated yet. And that's, I think, what's going to cause the real answer to the question at the end of 4 years. And it's an absolute empty set right now.
Wonderful to hear voices from across the world. We are actually going to start probably sooner or later on the channel a Trump tracker, because on a daily basis Sorry?
Can I have a final word?
Yeah, 30 seconds. Professor Hanafi, go ahead.
Except me. So
okay, go ahead.
I think Trump can be beneficial if there is a working call for liberal world and dissociation of United States from Europe, and now the liberal woke up to think why democracy is in a crisis, to bring such a human being into the power. So in this meaning, Trump can be very beneficial.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Disruptor, or someone who's going to transform the world in his own image. We'll wait and see. As I said, we should have a Trump tracker sooner or later, because that's where all the news keeps happening on a daily basis. We'll wait and see whether this uncertain world eventually results in the construction phase, as Mr. Russo put it. For now, all bets are off when it comes to Donald Trump. Thank you all very much for joining me on this very special Global Roundtable. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Jai Hind. Namaskar.